Hi, good evening and welcome once again to the Gildarie Freddie Kissoon show. We also coming to you live on YouTube. You can get it on the Guyanese Critic page. As always, we're hoping that wherever you're joining us from, that you're in good health, everything is going well, and it may be good morning in some places. If you're celebrating your birthday, we never tried this one here. We want to say happy birthday to you. And before I hand you over to my co-host, we don't want to waste any time. Had a very good show on Monday night with Ravi Dev. Interesting fellow, interesting conversation that we would had. Tonight, we have a gentleman in our midst, lots of experience, and if you're talking institutional experience all over, from business to security, to everything there, and he knows the terrain like the back of his hands, and I'm talking about the physical terrain as well as the business terrain in Guyana. And he is a good man to turn to if you want to know about the layout of the land. So I'd hand you right over to my co-host Freddie Kissoon. I say good night to him, and he is going to do the introduction because we have lots of questions for this good gentleman here.
Good evening. Wherever you are, our guest this evening is a household name and a man with very interesting history. I don't want to elaborate on his history and then the always on us, but from a background of being an officer in the army, in the Guyanese Defense Force, the Air Force wing of the army, he was a captain. Since that time, Gerry Gouveia has made countless journeys and have worn many hats. At present, the hat he wears is a businessman with extensive holdings. I think he is an aircraft company at Ogle. He owns businesses in the entertainment industry and tourism. But for our interest tonight is the important role of National Security Advisor to the President. When you hear about national security in Guyana, your skin grows, because this country has had security problems before it became independent. You may be too young to know about the 60s. So while we go to get into some of the business aspect of Mr. Gouveia, though I'm not too sure with that, we need to look a little bit about his history and the National Security Advisor role. But let me say this about Mr. Gouveia. Mr. Gouveia and I do not interact very often, but my role is to know about people and to study people. When the WPA GCOM Commissioner, Desmond Trotman, accused Mr. Gouveia of racism, if it wasn't so dangerous, it was comical. One of the few wealthy persons in this country that is quite a modest man, that will go into a shop and sit down with his friends and eat black pudding. Gerry Gouveia is a very modest businessman, and that is one of the things I like about him. I didn't know Mr. Gouveia, and then one day he met me at the Guyana gas station and engaged me in a conversation which he was very, very, he didn't need to say those things about me, those nice things about me. So that's too long an introduction. So, ladies and gentlemen, Guyanese wherever you are, and foreigners who are taking interest in this program, our guest this evening is former Chairman of the Private Sector Commission, National Advisor on Security to the President, and well-known businessman. Mr. Gouveia, the usual handshake. I don't know if I'll be not to shake your hand, but my first question is in the area of business, because I know you have an interest, an ongoing interest in the oil and gas industry, because you have some interest, and I think it was in the papers, the Ramp Company. I read a letter in the Starbuck News Sunday, Mr. Gouveia, and it was so appalling. It shattered my mental stability the day I was reading it. More than 50 signatures, of which maybe 99% are upper middle class people, and a good percentage of them live outside. said that we must cease oil and gas exploration. It's harmful to the environment. The president should stop and take stock. In this program, you can use certain adjectives, but I will take the liberty of saying I think that's an asinine idea.
You're actually being very modest and very kind to them with that description, because I would not even want to dignify an acknowledgement of a letter that says that we must allow Guyanese to continue their life that we've been, we've all been living with a hope and a potential to achieve the potential of Guyana. And right now we are on the threshold of doing it. Right now we have the right time, we have the right leader to achieve the prosperity that the oil and gas will help us to achieve. And I think the president made it very clear: this oil and gas is not an end, not a start and an end by itself. This is going to be used to create the environment for us in terms of manufacturing and agriculture and tourism. And so people who say not to take advantage of the benefits that oil and gas will bring to Guyana, I would not even want to address them. I'm sorry.
Well, Mr. Gouveia, I would want to jump straight into that Rams thing. It was dominating the news the last couple of weeks. I think out of everything that came out of it, I think one of it that you were very vocal on, or I saw some writings that you did, was who is a Guyanese? And I think that Ram situation, which went to the courts, would have brought that out because it raised the debate. So this company here, one of the principals, has origins in Guyana. Now I want to ask you, without really delving into the merits of that case, because I think it's still up there somewhat. How should Guyana be treating its citizens? How should Guyana be treating investors? How do we go about it? What's a good model to protect our people to make sure that they get a fair share? And how should we treat investors who we need into this country?
I want to say two things. First of all, I think I need to set the record straight. Roraima Airways and Gerry Gouveia, have nothing to do with ramps, nothing. Mm-hmm. My son, Gerry Gouveia, the junior one, he's not as good looking as his father, but he and his brother formed a company called GK Logistics, and they have formed a joint venture with ramps. So ramps have nothing to do with me personally, have nothing to do with Roraima Airways. I want to make that very, very clear, first of all. But having said that, is to say this: those who worked with me, Freddie and you, we worked together in 2020, and even before that, I have a serious passion for the rule of law, for due process and natural justice, and I have a very, very strong passion for good governance. Now, I have made the point that a Guyanese is a Guyanese, and that no Guyanese is more equal than the next. I don't care, so long as you have that birth certificate that says you're a Guyanese. Now, the only difference that we have is that you cannot be the president of Guyana if you haven't lived here for 7 years, and if you're not born in the soil, right? And I think that came about when the change in the Constitution in 1999, after the 1997 elections. And so that a Guyanese, and there's no qualification to make you more equal than me. So we are all Guyanese, and we must be treated equally. And the local content legislation, as it was done, as it is currently stands, and this is what the Chief Justice ruled on. It is the rule of law that for you to say, I don't like the person that the Rams choose as their Guyanese partner, you don't have that choice. You can't choose that. You're out of place, and you're breaking the law for you to say, I'm not giving you this local content because the local content certificate because I don't like the person that you choose. Mm-hmm. That is ridiculous. The rule of law is the rule of law. Now, if we don't like what we've done, we must change the rule of law. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is that tomorrow, the Private Sector Commission is actually having a working session at the Pegasus to discuss local content and to discuss what may need to be changed. Now, there are some people who are trying to say that a Guyanese who must be eligible to benefit from being part of a business in the oil sector must be a Guyanese that are here in Guyana. So what is happening to the diaspora? What is all this talk that we love our diaspora and they must come back and they must invest? What are we doing? And if we attempt to say that a Guyanese must be a resident in Guyana, then we are disenfranchising many, many other people. And many people, for example, who would have been living in Guyana all their life and then develop a business, for example, in New York, and decide that they're going to live between here and there, so they're not a resident in Guyana, so they lost their rights. So we have to be very careful how we are tinkering to make one Guyanese more equal than the next. So I am saying that all Guyanese must be respected equally. And the people who are, and it's got to be the legal minds, and this is why you see, I believe that Anil Nandaraj is such a genius. We are lucky to have him as our Attorney General, because I believe he will guide the government of Guyana legally and properly and ethically in terms of how we tinker with these laws to attempt to make one Guyanese more equal than the next. Now, I am 100% in support of Guyanese must benefit from businesses in the oil sector. So we don't necessarily want a major influx of foreign businesses and they are the only one benefiting. So the point is, foreign businesses must come to Guyana, they must find Guyanese partners, and we cannot force them which Guyanese partner to partner with. It must be people that they feel comfortable with, they have a chemistry with, they trust, and so on. And so I think, and I have the sense that I believe the government is going to do the right thing. I think, what has happened with the Chief Justice happened. Rams and Chicks is a Trinidadian company. We have been, and I came from a time, Freddie, when in the Private Sector Commission, we used to clamor every day trying to encourage foreign investors to come to Guyana. We used to say, let us open, let us remove the red tape and lay out the red carpet, let us remove the bureaucracy, because we wanted to create jobs for Guyanese. We were welcoming foreign investors, and suddenly now we got oil and we now have an attitude. We are behaving like if we are bigger than everybody else. Come on, we have Guyanese living in New York and Toronto.
Nicely put, Mr. Gouveia.
We have Guyanese living in Toronto and going to New York and they became citizens and they've created their lives. And so I must say, we must treat people the way we want it to be treated. And while I agree that Guyanese must benefit, the rule of law must be respected. And that's my only position on that.
I would have a follow-up, but straight up to you, Freddie.
I wish I didn't. The last time we were together like this, the three of us, was 2.5 years ago in the studio recording live. And I wish that incident, that event, or that occurrence didn't happen. I have said it in several columns, and I tell my wife it when we're in the kitchen. You have become a part of my psyche. I keep mentioning your name as I go on in life because you said something when we were together like this in the studio at Kaiju News. We were interviewing you and you said to me, and when you uttered those words, Mr. Gouveia, I didn't express to you, Gildarie, how I felt. I was just a bit silent, but things were going on in me. When you said to me, on March the 4th, Tuesday of the elections, you said, I don't know what's happening. They're not counting the votes. Something is wrong. Whole morning, they're not there. They're not counting the votes. I am going to pick up the U.S. ambassador, and we're going to see what was going on. Mr. Gouveia, that was the first indication that we were stepping back into the disaster of the 70s and the 80s. And so when you said that, the name Gerry Gouveia was transported into the prison wall of my psyche. Of course, people don't know, and you need to tell us now, you played an invaluable, priceless role. When I saw on a Zoom program, a lady named Vanda Lasdik said that they were the first. I don't know who she was referring for. And then when I heard the Star Book News insultingly on 3 occasions say the Private Sector Commission is pro-PPP. Mr. Gouveia, explain what the Private Sector Commission did in 1997 to save this country. And I know what you and Superstar did as part of the Private Sector Commission. Tell us what the Private Sector Commission did, again, in the name of Gerry Gouveia. Record history for our young people, Mr. Gouveia.
Well, I want to tell you the private sector. There's many people in the private sector commission, and they're amazing businessmen who make a lot of sacrifices. People like Edward Boyer, people like Ramesh Duku, people like Clinton Erlin. I mean, you name them, Manny Rampichat. People who have been there for all their life. And, Timothy Tucker. Timothy Tucker is the president of the Chamber of Commerce. But the point I want to make back in the day is I will say to you, people like Yesu Prasad and Clifford Reese and people like Norman McLean and David King, those men were the early people who started the Private Sector Commission. And there was a time in Guyana when only the politicians' voices used to be heard. And the men in those days really thought that we need to have a very strong private sector presence. Remember, we came from a time, Freddie, when the private sector was completely destroyed in Guyana. From the 1968 right into the 1990, I would say up to the time Forbes Burnham died in 1985, Desmond Hoyt reborn the private sector. There was a rebirth of the private sector under Desmond Hoyt. But before that, so the private sector was destroyed. When the private sector was reborn, and it then flourished in 1992, and the Private Sector Commission was born, it was to give a voice to the private sector. It was supposed to give a voice away from the politicians, so that every voice we heard was not only the political voices. And I will tell you, the Private Sector Commission played an amazing role in 1992 under the leadership of Yesu Prasad. He and they were invaluable in the things that they did, and they set a very excellent example for younger men like myself who followed in the shoes of Yesu Prasad. So when I became the leader, the president of the Tourism and Hospitality Association in 1996, and then I became immediately the vice chairman of the Private Sector Commission, I was so honored to be there. And when we started to look at issues, what was going to affect private sector development. And if you don't have good governance, if you have people interfering without democracy or rule of law, it would destroy business. And so the Private Sector Commission, every month, every day, we sat there. While we rather than building our businesses, we were in the boardroom together, talking about how could we make Guyana a better place? How could we interface with the politicians? How could we make them hear our voices? And I must tell you, the Private Sector Commission have grown and become exceptionally vibrant. But I'll tell you something else. I have actually been to the Defense University in Washington. And I went there on a scholarship from the U.S. government. And so I went to this program 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And it dawned on me that when I came back home and got into the private sector used to be afraid to deal and dabble in national security issues, to talk to the police, to talk to the army. And I came back home and I made the point that every single sector in Guyana is in our interest. There's nothing that is not in our interest. And so the private sector starts setting up subcommittees in agriculture, in forestry, in environment, in construction. I've always been in the subcommittee that dealt with security and governance. And so the private sector played a very important role in 1997 and 2001. And in fact, Freddie, if you remember, in 1992, there were massive violence in the city.
I was in
They burned down the city. In 1997,
more fire.
We burned down the city again. More violence. In 2001, again, it happened again.
Buxton.
The first time we had a fair and free elections in Guyana without violence was 2006. In 2006 is the first time and I'll tell you, the Private Sector Commission played a very important role. And I'll tell you, a lot of people don't give Robert Corbin sometimes enough credit for this. Robert Corbin came back home as a young lawyer, and he was now the new leader of the PNC. And I remember we went into those elections in 2006, and the election results were taking a long to come. And so we invited all the parties in the private sector to come. And we wanted to tell them, listen, please be patient, and support GCOM and let GCOM do their work, and don't let your supporters go on the streets. Everybody came to the Private Sector Commission except the PNC. So we led a delegation from the private sector down to Congress Place. And when we got to Congress Place, there were hundreds of people in the compound of Congress Place. Myself, Norman McLean, Yesu Prasad, Manny Rampichat, and whoever it is. I can't remember all of us were there. I don't think Manny was there though, but we took this delegation in and we got there. We sat in this room, a green room just like this, by the way. And Robert Corbin came into the room with his about 5 or 6 other people with him, and he was ranting and raving that how could the private sector say that these elections were fair and free when they had this problem at this place and this problem at this place. And we were able to say to him there, we said, Mr. Corbin, we had observers in these polling stations and this is what happened. You've been given the wrong information. And he sat there and he listened to us. And I'll tell you, Robert Corbin, there were people in the room who were upset with him because he was not taking
More aggressive.
an aggressive tone. And he was not, and they had people outside want him to lose the dogs of war in the city. And Robert Corbin was a responsible leader at that time. And if you look at what they did, the PNC unfortunately always have this way of going after their responsible leaders. Leaders who don't subscribe to violence. And so I remember when he called President Jagdeo at the time of concede the elections, there were people who were upset with him. So 2006 is the first time we had fair free elections, and the Private Sector Commission played a very important role. The PNC came to us in the Private Sector Commission in 2006 and 7, just before the 2006 election. They said no verification, no elections. So we said, what do you mean verification? And they came to us and they said, we want biometrics. So I said, what biometrics do you need? Because none of us really understood and they themselves didn't understand what they're talking about. So I was going back and forth to the Defense University in Washington. So having finished that conversation, I went there and a gentleman came in the room and he was doing a presentation on biometrics for airport security. So I asked him, I said, how could we use biometrics for elections? I really didn't know, because we were way behind at the time. He said, you know what, go to Jamaica. He said, we just finished a program in Jamaica where we introduced biometrics in their registration system, and maybe you could learn from them. I picked up the phone in Washington. I called the president of the Chamber of Commerce in Jamaica, and I asked him to arrange for me to meet with the Elections Commission people in Jamaica. And I flew from Washington to Jamaica, spent 3 days in Jamaica with the Elections Commission, and they took us around and showed us what they were doing with biometrics. And I came back home, I videotaped it, and I gave Suraj Bali a copy, Corbin a copy, and Jagdeo a copy. History will tell you that in 2008 is the first, so GCOM sent a team to Jamaica, and then we bought a $600,000 US database that was meant to convert manual fingerprints to digitize the fingerprints into the database. And for the first time in 2008, we scrapped the old database. We agreed with the PNC at the time, let's scrap the old database because we could not be sure that there were not duplicates on the database, right? Because it was manual. So what we did, we scrapped it and we did a completely new house-to-house registration in 2008. And the understanding was that this is going to be the last time we'll do it. Because when we do this now, we are creating a dynamic database, one where every voter would now have to or every person being registered would have to register with their fingerprints. Our face could look similar, but our fingerprints will never look similar. So we did the fingerprints, and we did your photograph and all your biodata, and we did a completely new database. We did something more spectacular than that. We also were going into the schools and registering the children at 14 years old. So the database, when you get to 18, the database automatically kick you over to the voters list, right? And more particularly, we also introduced the continuous cycles of registration. So it means that this database, you see, when you go to a person home to register, house to house, you're missing a lot of people. You're missing pilots. You're missing you're missing loggers, miners, Amerindians in the hinterland. When we introduced this thing in 2008, it was meant to be that this database will be in a live, dynamic database that will keep being updated by claims and objections, by the continuous cycles of registration. So every time, maybe 3-4 times a year, they open these registration booths where Guyanese who are not at home could go and register. And so the Private Sector Commission played a very important, answering your question, a very important role in the introduction of biometrics into the database. So as we sit here today, every single person who's registered on that database, their corresponding fingerprints. And ever so often, after every continuous cycle of registration, they send the database overseas, and the database is then scanned for duplicates. Right, and if there's any duplicate, it comes back again, and there's a massive investigation at GCOM. They send for if they're similar, they send for the 2 people, and GCOM will go through an entire investigation so people. I don't understand why, and I know that the commissioners at GCOM know this, And I know that the leaders of the political parties know this. And for them to be calling for us now to destroy this database that was being built over this period and calling it bloated. And the reason they're calling it bloated is because they don't understand that when, first of all, in the way that it was being done, now you're capturing thousands and thousands more Guyanese than you were capturing before with just a house-to-house registration. Because now, in the continuous cycles, you're now capturing more people, the pilots, people who might come home to visit and could go and register. So we have 700,000 Guyanese living here. We have probably another 700,000 or 800,000 living all over the world. Over the last 10 to 12 years, they've been coming back home, they've been registering. So it is not unusual to have a database with 800,000 people in it, because it's not about Guyanese living in Guyana alone. Now, but to vote, you have to be here. And so on the database, you have these fingerprints. You have the database being cleansed on a regular basis, so there's no way that you could have duplication. And then if you understand as well the voting process on voting on polling day, you'll understand it is no way, it is impossible. And anybody tell you anything else, they're either, they don't know, they're ignorant, or they're playing the fool. You cannot walk into a polling station and vote for you. I can't vote for you because when I walk into that polling station, I have all the parties sitting around here.
That is what is amazing.
That I have to verify that I am Gerry Gouveia to everybody in that room. It doesn't matter. Oh, this is Gerry. No. They will go through the process. They have a folio with my picture in it. Every one of them. They look at my picture. They look at my biodata. If there's any question, they would ask me about it. And so, when you know what a person in the coalition actually said, that all of their polling agents on polling day were corrupted, were bought out. Now that is the most ludicrous and stupid thing to play people intelligence, telling me that all of your 2,000 polling agents, or how much of them you had in the room, were bought out. So the point is, the Private Sector Commission played a very vital and important role over the years in bringing this database to a place where it is as transparent as possible. It is secure to get on the database. When you walk into the room to register, you have to have your documents, your birth certificate. You have to satisfy everybody who you are. And when you put your fingerprints there, those fingerprints are now then scanned into the computer and digitized. People believe it's just a scan. It's just a scan. It's not scanned. It's not a manual anymore. It is manually taken, and then it is scanned into the database, and it becomes digitized in the database. I am not against finding a device that you could now maybe connect, and then you could a person put their fingerprint on, and then it brings up their biodata. I'm not against that, but what I'm against is the total scrapping of the database and the ignorance of doing it, because you don't understand. This is a $600,000 database that was being built over the last, from 2008 to now. It's a dynamic database, and you have to understand that. If you don't understand technology, then you're going to be out in the streets screaming to destroy it. And the Private Sector Commission played a very, very important role in that process, Freddie.
Thank you very much, Captain. And we're talking here about some very important things when it comes to GCOM. I remember, Freddie, on March 2nd, 2020, I went upstairs to Kite Show Radio, and there wasn't any plan really, and I sat down, I dropped my bag there, and I said, let's go live. I had no idea what I was doing. And that program there went on and become a nightly program. You were there, part of it. But one of the very first guests that we had, and he was flying somewhere in the cloud, was Gerry Gouveia, Captain Gerry Gouveia, and he had a bunch of people with him, including some ambassadors and high commissioners. These are, and I was able to speak with him while I think they were headed to Essequibo, and I spoke to the U.S. ambassador as well. And I remembered, because you recalled March 4th as to be the turning point, something is wrong. We were told by them in the morning, around midday rather, that things were all right with that elections, and then all of a sudden, the night and the next morning, you see things start changing, the whole dynamics of that. But I want to ask you, sir, with regards, you have an attachment to an organization, I think IRI?
Yes.
Is it IRI? What exactly it is that you do and how important it is?
IRI is a very, very important organization, but I want to tell you that I have always had a very good relationship with the ABC ambassadors. and I talk to them, I give them my opinion, and we have a good relationship.
ABC, AU too.
AU. And so from in 2015 and the elections before that in 2011, I always would fly them around to have. They do a spot check of the polling stations around the country. So we would go to like maybe 5 or 6 regions. We go to region 2 and then region 10 and region 7 and so on and so on. And so we did it in 15 and we did it again in 20. And when we went, what we found was amazing. GCOM was doing an amazing job. Every polling station we went to, the GCOM staff was disciplined. It was like a franchise. When you go to every polling station, the lines were there, people were moving, there was no complaints, it was efficient, and every polling station we went in the different regions, when we came back and when we spoke to you for the first time, we were impressed with what we were seeing. And so I must tell you that these ambassadors they never pick political sides. These ambassadors always stood up on the side of the rule of law, right, and democracy and fair and free elections. And so that is what we were seeing. As we went around the country, we were looking at an amazing work being done by GCOM. But I want to tell you that at the level of the Private Sector Commission, we had started to anticipate. And I want to go back and tell you this, because in 2011, for the first time, people seem to forget this, for the first time there were people protesting on the streets of Guyana, calling for SOPs. Now, in 2011, I'm wondering, why would anybody want the SOPs? There were people from the PNC at the time on the streets protesting and calling on GCOM to give them GCOM copies of the SOPs. And I'm thinking, why would anybody want SOPs? We had no idea what was going on. So I led a delegation to GCOM in 2011. And we got to GCOM and Serge Bali was there with all his people. And we said, why don't you give them the SOPs? He said, why should I give them? They have the exact copy of my SOP. Why should I give it to them? And I was wondering, why do they need the SOPs? But it didn't matter, they were asking for it. And they were on the streets at the time when I think James Wan was shot with rubber bullets and Eddie Collins. And I was wondering, why are they doing this? I did not understand. So I started to think about this. So we actually got GCOM to agree to scan all the SOPs on a CD, on a disc, and then we distributed far and wide. And I kept wondering, why is it that they wanted these SOPs? I couldn't understand it. This is in 2011, And then 2015 came about. And then we got a call from Donald Ramatar, President Ramatar at the time, the private sector, could we come and see him? So we went there, and Donald Ramatar said to the Private Sector Commission, do you guys understand that they're stealing these elections? And we said, but how are they stealing it? We went there, we saw the polling stations. He said, no, they're changing the numbers on the SOPs. And we said, well, how could they be changing the numbers in the SOPs when you have the exact copy? And Donald Ramatar presented an SOP and showed us where a 7 was changed to a 9, and a 1 was changed to a 7, and a 0 was changed to 8. And I'm thinking, no man, this is in 2015. Mm-hmm. Are we thinking, something is wrong here, this don't make sense. How could they have the audacity to change numbers that everybody got it? Right. But what has happened to the political parties were outsmarted. They did not, after the vote was counted in the polling station, they forgot that these votes now had to be tallied, and they didn't believe that anybody would be so brazen to change the numbers. And so even the PPP, when they went into the tabulation rooms, they didn't even walk with the SOPs. They were walking with somebody must do a spreadsheet and give it to their person, and they went into the room, and the person who was doing the tabulation also they would come and work for 15 minutes, and they're gone, they come back and they make a declaration. So in 2015, I looked at this thing and I said, this is not right. So we went to the law, and the law says that this tabulation is a crucial part of the elections.
Probably the most important.
And so that every political party must go to that room, and every political party must have their copies of their SOPs. And so when GCOM calls out the number, everybody must concur with that number. So I asked Lowenfield. Lowenfield was my squaddy too. Was in the GDF together. We went in training together, and I said, so we invited Lowenfield and Serge Bali to come first of all to talk with us, and then Serge Bali left, and Patterson came. And we raised the matter with him. We said, listen, the tabulation that is happening, it needs to be more structured. You have to announce a time. Every political party must be given a notice to come there at a particular time with their SOPs to make sure this tabulation is being done properly. And they came to 1, 2, or 3 meetings, and then they stopped coming back to the Private Sector Commission. So I then pulled the Private Sector Commission together, our governance and security, and I said, guys, if there's any place that these elections are going to be tampered with, it is going to be these SOPs. And this is in record in the Private Sector Commission. And so every single observer that entered the room of the Private Sector Commission, I'm talking 3 or 4 months before, when their scouting teams came, then when we were saying to them, there are 2 places we have to be. We have to keep our eyes on. One is in the polling station and the count in the ballot box, and the second is the tabulation of SOPs. And so we were waiting for them. We knew that they were going to, because this thing started in 2011. It did not start in 2020. They started to build this thing up. They knew what they were doing. And so you had the entire international community in every region. All the international community went into those tabulation centers. Before, they never used to do it, you know. People used to just tabulate and give you a result. So in 2020, when they attempted to start the tabulation in Region 4, I think they were shocked to see the amount of people that entered that room, including all of the ambassadors. Everybody were ready and prepared for what was going to come. And they didn't understand it. And so when they started the count, and they started doing it on the night of the 2nd into the 3rd, and then somebody stopped them because they recognized that now everybody's watching them. Before they might have been able to get away with it because the political parties were not sensitive to what might come. But having learned from what happened in 2015, nobody was taking this for granted anymore.
Just a stick a point there. Was it one side of one party in particular that was behind this, or was it all the parties?
Behind what? Behind being in the room?
No, that were tampering with...
No, this was not political parties. This is people inside of GCOM.
You're talking about GCOM employees.
This is GCOM employees. This is not political parties.
Somebody had to be behind them.
Well,
there's another story.
Let the Commission Inquiry find that out. What I'm saying to you, there were people inside of GCOM who were interfering with the SOPs and the tabulation of the numbers. And the international community were there expecting it. So when you see what happened in 2020, it didn't happen by accident. When we started telling people that, listen, this is what might happen, some people were saying to us, oh, Gerry, you're being an alarmist. My colleagues in the Private Sector Commission, every single time people came to that room, we repeated the same story over and over. We said, you have 10 regions, you go to every single region and make sure that you're in the room for the tabulation. Make sure all the parties are there, and all the observers went into every one of the regions, and then they converged in Region 4. And when they were here, I mean, it's unfortunate. This is like a robber get caught in broad daylight. And it was terrible. So, and this is where the Private Sector Commission, not only Gerry Gouveia, I must tell you that, they have many people like Kit Nascimento, people, all of they were stalwarts in the private sector that worked with us together as a team to bring this together. But never again, Freddie. People say to me, oh, Gerry, it's gone already, why don't we forget it? Forget what? Listen, when we know what happened in Guyana in 1978, in 1980, and in 1985, when we know what happened there, and we forget it.
You left out 73 when people were shot.
And 73, right?
You're gonna have to repeat it if you don't forget.
The point is, Jim Jones had a sign above his head that marked, those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it. We must never, ever in this country, we must never again forget people who attempted to steal our elections, commit treason in this country. And what happened in 2020 was treason. What happened in 2020 was treason.
Mr. Gouveia, you said something interesting which has gone into the history book. You said from your experience, from your observation of 2011, this thing was in the works. This thing was being planned, and the apogee, the climax is 2015. I'm asking you a sensitive question now, and I will understand if you think it's too sensitive. Do you think the 2020 election was planned to be tampered with before, in the period 2015 to
Absolutely. Absolutely, absolutely. Unfortunately, you know,
So they knew that they could not.
whoever was the masterminds behind us were doing this since 2011. They were manipulating and they were developing the systems. And there had to be people as well who understand mathematics. Because when you look at how they were manipulating the numbers, ordinary people, it would fuck up for your mind. Even though it was a simple matter of translating numbers onto a Excel spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet would normally just tabulate the numbers for you. And I remember when they started, they were doing it right. And then they started to fudge the system, and they recognized that they couldn't get with what they wanted to do anymore, because you had, when they called for the bomb, when they said there's a bomb in the room, and the US ambassador said we're not moving, and everybody was like, and everybody said we are not moving. That was a day when this country was divided between good people and bad people. This was a day when people were prepared to give their life, non-Guyanese, because you had, that room was filled with foreign observers from the European Union, from the Commonwealth Secretariat, from CARICOM, and they were in that room and they were refusing to move. You had private sector leaders and private sector observers in that room from Guyana refused to move, and they were screaming a bomb that was in the room, and nobody said we're not moving, because we knew that they wanted to steal the elections.
If you don't testify in the commission inquiry, I'm going to speak to the secretary and ask him to present the video of this program to the commission, because I think what you have said here this evening is equivalent to anything that has been said so far at that commission. Will you be on the stand?
If I'm invited to be, I've always, I don't shy away from these things, you know. I believe, and you will say this better than me, that bad people and bad things only succeed if good people do nothing about it. There was a saying like that. I don't know if I had it right. But
Martin Luther King said
or
that.
somebody said
and
that.
Gandhi.
But the point is, I believe that as Guyanese, we all have a responsibility. And I have, all my life, I planted cotton in Kimbia. I picked cotton in national service. You know, I serve my country. I fly planes in the dead of the night and save people's lives. So I am not, when I make the comments I make as a Guyanese at my age now, and I have my sons here now who came back home, Canadian educated young men contributing to Guyana's development. I am saying I want to live in a country where the rule of law, where every single citizen have the right and feel social justice. And this is why I must tell you that when President Ali invited me to serve as the national directly with him, it was an honor. And for the last 2 years, President Ali, this country is really very, very privileged and honored to have him as the leader. Because with all of the money that we may have, if you don't have the right leader who would transform that wealth to prosperity and create a society where every single Guyanese, regardless of their race, regardless of their gender, regardless of their political affiliation, their religious, will have equal access to the opportunities. And this is what President Ali is attempting to do, and it is my honor to work and walk.
I don't want us to end without you telling us what you are doing, without bringing out sensitive material. What are you doing as the National Security Advisor to the President of Guyana? And what are some of the benefits that have accrued so far to security?
First, I want to tell you that, for 30 years I've been my own CEO. I have my own planes, I have my own boats, I could fly my plane where I want to go, I could jump in my boat, ride my mountain bike in the jungle, I could go any part of the world I want. And so for 30 years I live a very free, and in the last 2 years, I wake up every morning, put on this suit, got to go down to the office, report to the president, and that took is a huge sacrifice. But I'll tell you something, at my stage in my life, it's a great honor for me to be able to give back with all my experience and training and exposure and so on. And to work with a man like President Ali. And President Ali, he listens. A lot of leaders don't listen. A lot of leaders, they believe that they know it all. And this man is highly educated. And you would have a conversation and he listens. And so for me, as this country have never really had a national security advisor. We had one actually. David Granger was the national security advisor to Desmond Hoyt. But there was never any institution, anything was really put in place. When I was invited to be the national security advisor and work with the president, we work very close with the police and the army and the National Intelligence Agency, but more particularly, the president vision of where national security is how it got a direct connection to national prosperity. And national prosperity is the objective of the president. Now, national prosperity got nothing to do with money. It got to do with creating a society. So I have 6 pillars. One of them is, of course, the issue of social cohesion, social justice, and so on. Then you have the issue of creating the enabling environment for business development, creating jobs. And then you have democracy and transparency and so on. And then you have our international relations. CARICOM was happening, and the OAS was happening internationally. And then we have the police and the army and so on. And the president's position on national security is that the 4 pillars is very important. So, and if you look at the president's role every day, go out to meet people. The president, this thing about one guy, and it's not a slogan, it's something he brings from his heart. And so for me, who have given so much to my country, made so much sacrifice, I could not have ended up in a better place giving back to my country with a man, with a president who listens, and who is not a man with ego and believe that he listens and he believes. And so for me, it's a great honor. So the work that I do every day with the president, we had some serious issues in the past, as you know, from security standpoints. We had issues with guns being lost from the GDF. We had rogue policemen, rogue army. Those things will never happen, not under President Ali's watch.
So we will not get another box down.
We will not get that, because President Ali working every day to get into the villages, to meet with the people and talk with the people, and the security forces. And the president is very, very appreciative of every man, woman, and child in this country, and also every man and woman in uniform. And so the president is working, he pays attention to them, he listens to them. And for me, like I said, from a national security standpoint, there are some particular things that we are doing, Freddie, and I will tell you quickly, but more particularly is the issue of creating a society that is just, where every man, woman, and child, regardless of the color of your skin, regardless of your political affiliation, must have equal access to the opportunities, not free money, equal access to the opportunities. So there'll be no institutional barriers on race and all this nonsense that people going on about apartheid and racism in Guyana. Freddie, I will never, and I'm proud to call, I'm a Portuguese Guyanese, I make no excuse about that. And I will say to you, but I will never sit in any group of people that practice racism against any Guyanese or any person in the world for that matter. And I will say to you, there's no institutional barriers to anybody based on the color of the skin, based on their political affiliation. There may be people, like even I, for example, sometimes have a hard time. I walk into a room and there are people who I knew were part of the attempt to steal our elections in 2020. It stabbed me in my stomach every time. I have a difficulty dealing with people who I know that was deliberately attempting to steal our elections in 2020. I walk into a room and I want to walk out. But other than that, there should be no discrimination against any Guyanese, and that's President Ali. And as his NSA, as the National Security Advisor to the President, I am so impressed with him. And as a Guyanese who have never been political, I'm not a member of the PPP, you know. I'm not a member of the PPP, I'm not a member of any political. In fact, my family used to be strong United Force supporters. My family was United Force supporters. And so when I went into the army and I was never a member of any political party. But I knew that I wanted to live in a country where social justice, the rule of law, and today that's what we have.
Mr. Gouveia, you could look, our viewer, you could look to the cameras and show those young boys and girls that work in Georgetown and have to line up at the Stabrook and wait for buses to take them to East Coast and East Bank. In 1992, I was on the streets. I saw people being led by politicians breaking stores. 1997,
Yes.
We had more fire, so fire. I saw people cutting the hose from the fire engine that were watering the PPP building, Gimpex. In 2001 to 2006, Buxton was a receptacle of violent evil. Could you assure those young Indian boys and Indian girls who work for a living, go home to their house, some of them have babies, and assure them that we would not have a repetition? We had Mr. Ravidev here, and he, together with his organization, Guyana Indian Foundation Trust, they compiled the atrocity that happened in 1998 when the PNC rejected the 1997 election results. If anybody can assure us of that, it has to be the National Security Advisor.
Well, I would say this to you, Freddie, that leadership, I hold the leaders responsible. And I'll give you an example. In 2020, when Mingo was attempting to announce these fraudulent election results
From the balcony?
from the balcony, you've actually had people on the East Coast erupted in violence. And I saw PPP leaders call and tell them, go back home. Now, that is responsible leadership. I saw President Jagdeo, Vice President Jagdeo, publicly call and demanded, and they sent people out to because these were their supporters who were so frustrated by what was happening at GCOM that they erupted in violence. And
one guy lost his life.
And they took responsibility and they went there and instructed people to get off the road. And it was hard for them. And I'm saying that every time you have violence in our streets, I sympathize with the people who are being led and encouraged to do that. The leaders, let us find those leaders. And this is why the United States put sanctions on, they had surgical sanctions on individuals. This is the first time the United States ever did, I almost look at it, it's the first time the United States ever did surgical sanctions in a particular country on particular people. So what they were doing in Nigeria, for example, they waited until Nigeria collapsed, and then they went and they put a sanction, this general, and they did the same thing in Venezuela. They didn't do that in Guyana. They identified the people who were attempting to usurp our democracy, and they went after them.
The nation never knew who those people were.
But I'll tell you something.
There were dozens of them.
I'll tell you this is important that I'll tell you this. So we were, but either it was going to be two ways. Either they sanctioned the country or they went to the individuals. And what they did, they identified the individuals who were interfering with the elections. And they went after them. And I'll tell you, a lot of people don't know this, but I'll announce it for the first time. So Minister Indar and the Deputy Ambassador in the U.S., Zulfikar, myself, were in constant contact with the U.S. administration and keeping them briefed on what was happening. And so, and the U.S. knew what was happening. So on the 28th of July, when did they concede? On the 2nd of August?
August 2nd, they conceded the last day of July.
On the 28th of July, on the 20th of July, we got a call from at the Private Sector Commission that the White House wanted to have a call with the Private Sector Commission. And so we went into the Private Sector Commission room, and the Zoom came up, and Indar, myself, and Zulfikar were sitting in the room, and they came up on the screen. And they said,
would you tell us who's the person that was in the screen in the White House?
I wasn't in the White House, but it was people from the White House.
Okay.
And they said that because they look as if they were not going to give up, they were now going to move to economic sanctions against people. And so we were
against people.
Not a country.
Gildarie, right. This never came out. This is the first time.
I just wanted to make
this is the first time.
So they said this on the 28th of July that they are now going to. They've already imposed the travel sanctions on people, but they were now going to take it to the step further, and they're now going to impose economic sanctions. Now, at the same time that was happening, I knew that there were issues happening behind the scenes in the UK and in Canada and the European Union. And they were identifying the people, and this will continue to happen in Guyana. Any Guyanese leader, because Guyana is so crucial to the national security of the Caribbean. Any individual country in this Caribbean that falls by the wayside and become a weak or fragile state affects the national security and stability of this entire region. This region is the third border of the United States. You have Canada in the north, Mexico in the south, and the Caribbean. And this Caribbean border is only as strong as every individual region. With the collapse of Venezuela, Venezuela is creating serious issues for us with their non-state actors and all of their loose rule of law happening in Venezuela. Venezuela is now trying to pull it back. But they have created serious problems for us. If Guyana, if we don't remain a law-abiding and structured a structured democracy with the rule of law, we become a
And
serious
democratic elections.
serious threat to the Caribbean. And so when the U.S. in the 28th of July, 2020, announced to us in the Private Sector Commission room that they have just decided to impose economic sanctions on the people who were doing this. And we all looked at one another in the room, and I picked up my phone, I took a picture of the screen. I have a picture of my phone. And then one of the people said, Gerry, maybe you should not have done that. And
So you have a picture of the other side of the Americans.
yes. Well, we were on the screen as well because it was a Zoom call. And
Make sure you save that.
oh, it is saved in all kind of places. And then one person said to me, Gerry, maybe you should not have taken the picture. And then another person in the screen said, you know what? Why don't you share that picture? Why don't you share this story with some other people who might be? And we did. And
Well, you can't share it with us.
No, but there's
You can't share it with us.
2 days after,
Mr. Gouveia.
was this conversation, and this is interesting, was this conversation or that forum that took place there made known to the then president of Guyana, David Granger, and the people around?
well, you have to ask him that because 2 days afterwards he conceded.
Well, we
I
were asking you.
I don't know that. What I know is what happened in the room,
Uh-huh.
and then it was hinted to us that maybe we should let some people know.
Let me ask
no,
you a
but,
question. Hold on, Freddie. Mr. Gouveia, I need to ask you.
Yes.
What caused David Granger to buckle?
You're not going to like my answer when I say this to you. I want to say this to you first of all, that David Granger, and a lot of people, David Granger was a man who respected the rule of law. And I believe that if David Granger was not a responsible leader, we would have gone into a serious spiral of chaos. And I think David Granger held it together. He made a commitment from day one that he was going to always abide by the ruling of the chairman of GCOM. Maybe he was hoping that she might have done something different.
Okay.
Right? But the point is, he always made a commitment that he was going to abide by whatever the GCOM chairman said. But David Granger ran into problems in his own party, not because he was a bad man, but because he didn't do the wrong things. David
Are you saying
Granger,
that he was not in control?
David Granger ran into problems. People demonized David Granger within his own party. Not because he was a bad man, but because he didn't do the wrong things.
But
They did not want him to concede. They did not want him to agree to CARICOM. They did not want him to agree to the international observers. They did not want him to do many, many things. But David Granger stood his ground, and we may not have liked how long it took. But you know what? In the final analysis, he said he was going to respect the ruling of
The court.
the courts, and he was going to respect the ruling of the chairman of GCOM, and he did. And a lot of people hated him for doing that.
Did he take the decision alone?
I don't know. Those are things you got to ask inside of there. But I'll tell you something. If they did not concede, this is the 28th of July. The 20th of July, this information came to us.
5 days later.
Not 5 days later. This is the 20th of July.
Uh-huh.
You tell me when they conceded.
they conceded the end of July with the court case, and the chairman of GCOM was asking Mr. Jagdeo and Mr. Granger to have a discussion, and Mr. Jagdeo said no. And then that the 31st of July, 30th July,
The point is that
so Mr. Gouveia, this is excellent
the point is
historical
that
material.
the international community, not the US alone, the ABC, and I'll tell you, CARICOM, if we had gone along that path, Guyana was going to become a pariah state in this region. CARICOM is not going to take it lightly. I will tell you, I was in contact every day with the Prime Minister of Barbados. Every single day I was talking to her. I was talking to the leaders of the CARICOM every day. All the leaders, I was on my phone every day talking to them, giving them an update what was going on. And I'll tell you, if these elections were not conceded in compliance with the rule of law, not only were we going to become a serious target for the international community, but certainly CARICOM is going to come down.
Did Barack Obama
He was
try to call?
he was the president,
no,
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump didn't try to call it. No.
It was the Secretary of State.
Yes.
But-
And did he attempt to call
Pompeo.
on the particular August the 2nd?
I don't know that.
You don't know
I don't want to be presumptuous
Right.
here.
Mr. Gouveia, for all the months we've been doing this program, Gildarie, this kind of material is really the essence of history. And Mr. Gouveia, I must say, as a trained historian, and as someone who has fought for democracy all my life, I'd like to shake your hands on the information, the role you have played. We didn't know this, Mr. Gouveia. We didn't know you were in touch with the White House. We knew about the visa sanctions, but we didn't know individual persons would have been sanctioned. I think the Guyanese people, just as they owe those ambassadors and they owe those opposition leaders at the time that fought openly for democracy, I think we owe people like you.
Well, as a former newsman, I will tell you this, Freddie. I was always, and I know Mr. Gouveia probably knows more than I could talk about, and he can't talk about it. But those last days leading up to August the 2nd, I will always be curious as to what were the trigger points, what was the final nail in the coffin. And I know that a lot played out within those. And here we have it, what happened on July the 28th. And we're not talking here, but visas being taken away or
economic sanctions.
Economic sanctions.
Do you know what economic sanctions meant? It meant that every single Guyanese who got a house overseas, not only them, but their brothers and their sisters, when the United States do economic sanctions on people, it was unprecedented that what was about to happen, right? And I will just say this to you: even we look back at 2020, it missed us, but it would not. If anybody again tried to do anything like that, the people who lead violence in our streets, people who want to burn down our buildings, the people who are attempting to sabotage our cokers at night when the tide is coming in and open the cokers, people who are throwing garbage in our streets at night, they're driving around the city and dumping garbage in residential areas. We have some very...
Do you think the police station fires were deliberate?
I am very concerned about it. I'm very concerned that there are people in our midst that is attempting to destabilize our country, destabilize our image, bring friction among our people, to destabilize our country. They're throwing the garbage on the streets, they're blocking the drains, they're opening the cokers when it should be closed, and closing the cokers when it should be open. And that is why, President Ali's position is, I'm not going to accept that. And so he have a duplicate, what is that the city don't flood?
For a little while.
For a little while. And the fire, look at the fire hydrants around the city. This is the first president in probably 40 years that has gone around to every fire hydrant to make sure it is fixed. And so he got a commission that is dealing with it. So this man is not only dealing with the big things, this man is dealing with all the things, and his national security, for him, he wants to ensure that every Guyanese must feel safe in their home.
You praised the PNC leader Granger.
I didn't praise him. I actually said... I made a comment about him.
You made a comment about his character. You also made a comment positively of Corbyn's character. Has Mr. Norton disappointed you?
Not yet. Norton have done nothing. Norton have done nothing.
No, his language, perception.
Well, the only thing I would say about R.B. Norton is, to be a political activist is very different from being a political leader.
Right.
And a political leader, one of the things you have to do is to win international legitimacy. And what struck me about him is that the day that he was taken his oath of office, he did three things. One, he was attacking the international community about rigging Guyana elections. So if and then he was attacking the private sector commission or the private sector's people, and then he was fighting Joe Harmon in his own party. So as a strategist, you're fighting an internal fight, you're fighting an external fight with the international community, and you're fighting your own private sector in the country. And so I would say that he's a very educated man, very intelligent guy. But I believe that that kind of radicalism and that kind of advocacy is not the place for a political leader to be. A political leader got to win friends and influence people. He got to win the international community, got to win international legitimacy. And so when they came to meet the Private Sector Commission, the Private Sector Commission position was, tell us what you're going to do different in education. Tell us what you're going to do different in agriculture. Tell us what you're going to do different in manufacturing. What are you going to do different in tourism? Don't come here and tell us about racism. Don't come here and tell us about the PPP is bad. Tell us what you're going to do differently. Mm-hmm. And we had a very constructive conversation, the private sector and Aubrey Norton and his people. And that is where I believe we have to encourage the opposition to go. They have to develop constructive programs to say, here's what the PPP is doing in education, this is what we will do better. Here's what they're doing in agriculture, this is what we'll do better. And we're not seeing that. All they're getting hold is a lot of rhetoric. They have their people protesting on the streets. They should be there planning to say, if we're going to take this government in 2025, what are we going to do better and different?
Kind of language that we want to hear, ladies and gentlemen. There's a lot more to that we would have wanted to talk about. Like, for example, some of the security enhancements to our country. And Mr. Gouveia did not even get a chance to talk about that. We do happen to have drones manning the city right now. Very shortly, the government will be rolling out its new helicopter search and rescue. We also have a lot of security cameras and so on. A lot of stuff has been done on the security side of things, but a lot of explosive material coming out here tonight, bringing to light what would have transpired during that 5 months in 2020. I hope to God, and Freddie and Mr. Gouveia, Captain Gouveia, I'm a little concerned that people like yourself are not being called to testify before the CO. I am wondering about the method, the MO that they're using. I hope that they do, because you have a lot to say. I know that
a lot to say here this evening.
And
this program has to go to the commission.
And his comments at the end too, when it comes to talking about what's the role of an opposition leader, I have to agree with that, because I myself, I fear when we don't have an opposition that is functioning. I think they should do more. They have to represent the people of this country. So wherever you are tonight, I want to say a good night to you. I want to say my gratitude again to my co-host Freddie Kissoon, and of course to Captain Gerry Gouveia, our National Security Advisor to the President, Irfan Ali, for at least taking us through some history there. And of course, we'll have to bring him back, because there are many more things to talk about. He's also doing some work there, constitutional reform. I don't think we've been able to talk much
Well, we've been
about
doing with IRI, the election reform.
Right, and so we have to continue the talks as to how we move this country forward. So
Mr.
thank you very
Gouveia,
much.
this has been a journey through history. This has been an exploration into Guyana's historiography. I think what you have just said here has to be recorded. I know I will do a column on it. What you have said here has never been written in the newspapers, in any television program. I've not seen it on any Zoom program. And in that respect, you've made a remarkable contribution to this program. I'd like to shake your hands and thank you.
I'm shaking a lot of hands, man. Captain, thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are, good night, good morning. Have a pleasant rest of the night. You're going to be back on Friday. I think it's going to be some comedy. Not going to say anything for it. Have a pleasant rest of the day and night.